It seems to me we need special occasions to remind ourselves of the blessings of life. Christmas, birthdays, weddings, and anniversaries. All these occasions need a time of preparation, else they just don't happen. Christmas needs Advent. Birthdays need thinking about buying the right present for someone. Weddings seem to take an age to plan. And if you go into any shop that sells chocolate, you'd think it's been Easter since Boxing Day. Like we don't do the 40 days leading up to Easter, but want to fast forward to Easter Day itself. Today is the first Sunday of Lent, and we remember today that Jesus goes out into the wilderness for 40 days where he wrestles with faith and doubt. Mark says he is tempted by Satan, evil personified. 40 days of being tested and tempted in the wilderness, and at the end of it Jesus emerges, but it doesn't really get any easier. The greatest challenges are still yet to come. We're journeying towards Easter, but to get to Easter we have to go through the cross and the tomb. We're going through a really difficult time in this pandemic, and we don't know when things will improve. There seems hope in the air. Spring is in bloom and blossom, and the vaccinations are continuing at a great pace. But we still feel down about all the restrictions. We still long to meet people and hold them again. We want life to be wonderful again. But as this COVID-19 virus reminds us all, we must face up to difficult times as well as happy ones. Jesus is driven into the wilderness. He goes out to a physical place where few people go. Spiritual wilderness is a place where few people even dare to go. I'm not talking about camping and hiking in the midst of nowhere. I'm talking about real wilderness here, where we wrestle with ourselves and our spirit and our relationship with God. What good is it? Can't put it on a CV. Doesn't earn you any money, doesn't really make your life any easier, may even make it harder. So why would you do it? And that's what Lent asks of us. For 40 days, we're asked to go into a wilderness place and prepare ourselves for the longer journey of our discipleship. Lent asks us to wrestle with the hard stuff, to pray, to fast, to do something new, to face temptation full on and choose to follow Christ anyway. It's not popular. Many people will just show up at church, hopefully if we're allowed, on Easter morning. But few will have spent these 40 days getting ready. Everyone likes a party, but people resist the setting up for it. And yet, for those of us who choose to make this 40-day wilderness journey, we discover something meaningful along the way. Christ is there too. We've often been in the wilderness, but now we find we're not alone. And that's good news, because the reality of our lives is that we spend a lot of time lost. We spend a lot of time facing temptation and wrestling with God. A lot of time with our demons. Jesus knew what it was like. The corporal in the army was in charge of a group of men hauling a heavy gun into position in America. The gun got stuck in the mud and it was a messy, difficult job. He shouted at his men. He told them to pull harder, but he yet remained on firm ground, not prepared to help out. Still, the gun wouldn't move. The corporal grew more and more angry. And then another man came by. He saw the problem. He jumped into the ditch with a platoon. He got into the mud and helped the men pull on the ropes. And slowly, the gun finally moved into position. The stranger turned to the corporal to ask why he hadn't given a hand himself. "Don't you know?" he said. "I'm a corporal. That's a job for ordinary soldiers." "I understand," said the stranger. "So next time you have a dirty or heavy job, just send for your commander-in-chief to come and give you a hand." And then he turned and walked away. leaving the corporal to realise that it was none other than George Washington who had pulled with his very men. So in the same way, Jesus was prepared to get dirty in the mud of life, to slip around in the temptations of the world, to show us that he was one of us. What a friend we have in Jesus. If you have had a hard time with faith, Jesus knew what that was like. Do you ever struggle with difficult choices? So did Jesus. Are you grieving? Jesus grieved too. Are you preparing yourself for something new, something you don't know how you're going to survive? Jesus knew what that was like too. And I'm convinced that when we go through these wilderness times, God looks at us with nothing but compassion and love. After all, God watched his own son go through such a time also. 40 days in the wilderness. The number 40 is a sacred number. I don't know if you can remember what you were doing 40 years ago, the 21st of February 1981. I can't. I wonder what it will be like on the 18th of February, on the 21st of February 2061. I'll be 93 if I'm still here. 40 in the Bible is a very significant number. Noah spent 40 days in the midst of a great flood. The Israelites wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Moses didn't eat for 40 days and nights while he received the law. Elijah travelled for 40 days towards the mountain of God with no food. All of these episodes of 40 speak to me of serious spiritual preparation, almost before life, real life with God, can begin. Noah represented a new beginning with God after several disasters at the beginning of Genesis. The Israelites needed time to learn how to live as a people being instructed by God before they could appreciate fully the delights of the promised land. And here now Jesus goes through 40 arduous days, soul searching, listening to his calling and responding. Maybe, just maybe, we need these 40 days also of God-centeredness too. Perhaps not literally 40 days, but some time to think what it means to be God's people serving him in this place today. We'll struggle sometimes like Jesus and the other people I've mentioned today, but God invites us to his throne, into the presence of himself where there is grace. And in the desert, Jesus was led by the Holy Spirit. And there he met in the watches of the night his demons. At times, maybe we feel at peace. At times, we're at deep rest in the wilderness. At other times, there are outer voices and inner voices coming from deep within, reminding of us of our doubts, our insecurities, our shame, our failures, our weakness. In the desert alone, Jesus is wrestling with himself, facing down his own demons. Sometimes I just wonder what Jesus' temptations were. God doesn't list them like the other gospel writers. Do you think Jesus was tempted to give it all up? Surely he must have suspected the cost of the road he was called to walk. I wonder if he doubted his gifts, his ability to live into God's call to him. I love the Winter Olympic Games, don't you? You sit up late watching something like curling, not understanding it, but engrossed nevertheless. At the last Winter Olympics, Lizzie Arnold retained her title in the skeleton. What made her victory even more extraordinary was how close she had come to dropping out due to her struggles with a chest infection. She had to be helped off the track on the Friday before the final. My chest infection was stopping me from breathing, she said. If it wasn't for my physio telling me to go down again and again, I'm not sure I'd be here today. I was dizzy, I couldn't breathe, I had no idea what had happened. I've been ill for a week. And yet, she was still successful at the end of that week. Perhaps it was that long-term goal that kept her going. Perhaps knowing Lent doesn't last forever keeps us going. Temptation driven into hard times. These things won't be the last word. Prior to Jesus being sent into the wilderness, he was firstly baptized. In that he was affirmed and reminded that he is beloved of God through all of life's journey. And that comes to us also today. God says to us now at the beginning of Lent, you are loved and held. That whatever the wilderness feels like for you, whatever you face, you don't face it alone, because we believe in a Jesus who gets what life is like, the trouble, the questions, the times we feel broken, and walks alongside us in the journey. We don't escape or avoid the wilderness. Like Jesus, we must go through it. We must face the temptations and be with the wild beasts. But as we do, we know we are not alone. The angels ministered to Jesus. Remember who you are. Remember who you are, a beloved son and daughter of God, with whom God is well pleased. Those words of encouragement and reassurance should stay with us through these 40 days of Wilderness Lent. So we begin again today, a Holy Lent, choosing to get closer to God, even though perhaps Lent isn't that popular these days. We want the chocolate eggs now. We want the cross to be full of flowers now, not stark and laid bare. We want the joy, not the pain. We want to turn up at church on Easter morning, having fast-forwarded through these next 40 days. Everyone likes a party. Not everyone likes setting up for it. But for those of us who choose to make this 40-day wilderness journey, may we discover something rich along the way. May we know that Christ is with us.